Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and we have a Tocasia Dig Site Mentor self-mill deck. This deck comes to us from Lexa, who says they're looking for general improvements and looking for things they may have missed, and says a fresh set of eyes is always useful, with the only restrict being MTGO legal, which means, as a reminder, some cards are not on MTGO. It's kind of haphazard. We're going to do our best to avoid them, but it's a little tricky to find out which cards that applies to. As always, this deck list is in the video description below, and I highly recommend you take a look to see what a self-mill Tocasia deck looks like before I start talking about it. In fact, if you think of anything that I have not said, I'd love for you to leave a comment down below so we can work together to make this deck the strongest it can be. So, who is Tocasia Dig Site Mentor and why are we using them as a self-mill strategy? Tocasia is a 4/3 for 4 in Bant colors, Human Artificer, and her main ability says that creatures you control have vigilance and tap Surveil 1. Surveil 1 says you're going to look at the top card of your deck, and then you're going to choose whether you leave it on top or put it into the graveyard. It's pretty safe to say that in a deck like this, you will constantly want that card to go into your graveyard. Now, Tocasia has a second ability, which for perhaps too much mana, for 8 mana with 2 of blue, green, and white in there, you can exile Tocasia from your graveyard, and then you can return any number of target artifact cards with total mana value 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. This one seems a little too far-fetched to get working, the second ability, but there's definitely ways to make it happen. If it didn't have that pesky text of activate only as a sorcery, I would love it much, much more. And also, I would note that it's kind of difficult for this deck to put Tocasia into your graveyard by itself, so there is a bit of a problem there, though I don't think you will have any trouble getting your opponents to destroy Tocasia for you. So before we go any further, let's take a look at the curve. As I expected from seeing the deck list, this is a very nice curve that goes across to 6 with only one 6-mana card, which I believe, if we take a look, is Jace for its untap all creatures ability. And the rest are cards either we want to toss into the graveyard anyways and have other costs, or are generally worth what they are. Now, so when I look at this list, I'm thinking of this as an all-in kind of combo list. The things that make me think of that is that we have our main and almost only win conditions are Lab Maniac, Thassa's Oracle, and Halo Fountain. Those now we have the ability to create an abhorrent amount of 1/1s with March of the Multitudes and Secure the Wastes, but traditionally that's not the kind of win conditions decks like these really use. We're using them for the bodies, not so much for the potential to defeat an opponent with a sea of 1/1s. So we have our main plan being to mill ourselves out and cast 2 of 3 kind of instant win conditions based on our graveyard. And then the other one is just to have 6 white mana, and where is it? There it is. Halo Fountain. Oh, it's 5 white mana and 15 tapped creatures. This is also very doable, I should be clear. It might not feel like Halo Fountain is one of those cards that you look at and go, oh, okay, that's not going to happen. But in a deck like this, the final text can absolutely happen, so it's definitely worth looking into. With that, and we might just, very generously say with the alternative win con is to attack with a bunch of creatures or Tarmogoyf. With that, we're going to talk about a few cuts or things I have noticed before we look at inclusions, because I'm going to argue the inclusions are kind of straightforward and won't be too hard to suss out. So something I want to point out is that we've got a few cards that just kind of stand out as weird inclusions. Jetfire and what's the other one? Ratchet. These Transformers that came out before my time, probably before I was born, um, stand out as being really weird inclusions. They don't particularly seem to make sense to do anything. Ratchet can bring back Halo Fountain if you gain 3 life. I don't think that's enough. Jetfire also removes +1/+1 counters from artifacts, namely itself. Also feels weird. I feel like these two cards are included because the deck builder enjoys those cards. And though I am not one to rip someone's pet cards out of their hands, I would give some serious thought in such a strong deck otherwise for playing these kind of cards. Now, Iron Soul Enforcer, excuse me, that's a tough one to say. Also kind of stands out a little bit as a strange inclusion. Um, it lets you attack with your commander and get a artifact back from your graveyard. But really, I think the one we want is Halo Fountain, and therefore I would rather you just play, oh no, artifact or creature to the battlefield. Cannot remember. It is a sorcery in white, 2 mana. What is it called? Recommission. I feel like Recommission will just do this job considerably better. It'll also buy back some of your creatures, like Eternal Witness, that can be particularly good to buy back. But it'll also just bring back the Halo Fountain nice and easy, and I think you just prefer that. Likewise, Tarmogoyf seems weird here. I understand that you're going to have a lot of permanents, including battles and planeswalkers. I think you have almost every card type except for maybe tribal, though it might be in there and I just don't notice it. Even then, Tarmogoyf is not what we would consider a commander card. It is just a beat stick, a very heavy, very efficient beat stick. But in this format, efficiency is not really what we're looking for. We tend to look at scalability, and by that I mean something that improves as you play your deck well, whereas Tarmogoyf just kind of slightly grows, and I don't think it kind of sticks out as a weird inclusion. Likewise, Sphinx's disciple also kind of sticks out. I think we have another creature here that does the same thing for considerably less. I think it's Follow Sage, where every time you tap it, you can draw a card. It's a whole mana less and activates on tap instead of untap, which when you don't have something like White Plume Adventurer or where is it, Drum Bellower, Sphinx's Disciple takes an entire turn cycle for you to draw that card. And I will note that if your opponent then, board wipes between your turn, your first turn and your second turn, I mean, like your turn and then your next turn, you don't gain the benefit of drawing a card. So it's also a 2/2, which puts it like just because we've been talking about her recently, puts it within Elish Norn's range among a multitude of other things. It's just a particularly weak card for a pretty strong deck. Like this is a deck that plays Enlightened Tutor, so I find it a little surprising that you'd be playing a card like Sphinx's Disciple. Just something I noticed. Another one that stands out, and perhaps the one that stands out the most to me, is Midnight Clock. Because Midnight Clock forces you to shuffle your entire deck and graveyard together. And you don't want to do that, right? Like your entire half your game plan is to completely mill out your deck. So it's very, very strange to me that you would be playing a card that forces you to undo all the work you did. Now you might be thinking, it's a May. It's not a May, surprisingly. And you actually have to put an hour counter each time. So in 3 full turn cycles, whether you like it or not, Midnight Clock is going off, and any work you've done to surveil your deck into your graveyard is all gone. Now, maybe it's in there as a a measure to kind of shuffle your deck back in, but you're already playing Enhanced Surveillance that does that by itself particularly well. In fact, if you wanted another version of that, I believe there is a Eternal Life artifact. Maybe it's not that. Oops. Get rid of the period. Nope, still the same thing. Let's see. Let's say shuffle, gain 5. There it is. Elixir of Immortality. Elixir of Immortality does the same thing, only requires 2 mana to tap, and doesn't have you have complete control over it. So if a worry is that you're going to lose when you are milling out, you can use this. But I don't know how you would be losing if you're milling out. I think you're particularly strong in those kind of cases. All right. So those are some things that I feel kind of stand out as what I would consider to be kind of strange inclusions. The rest of it generally, oh, wedding announcement is one more. Wedding announcement is very, very strange to me. I recognize it makes 3/1/1s over time, and it then does buff your team when flipped, which allows you to actually do something with all the creatures besides surveil. But I mean, when you put it up against something like Join the Dance, it's clearly inferior for the strategy that you're doing. So I don't think Wedding Announcement particularly belongs here. Maybe it's just a card you have from Pioneer that you've put in here. But yeah, I don't. I would say cut that definitely. And if you want another effect like that, a Join the Dance style effect is probably just faster to get all the creatures immediately. It increases the number you can surveil on the next turn, and I just think it's generally stronger. All right, so what would I suggest that this deck is missing to kind of fill it out? Well, something I notice that's kind of strange to me is that you're very, very low on one drops. For a deck that benefits so much of having creatures and wanting to tap those creatures in a multitude of ways, it it is just strange that we are so light on mana dorks, because I think in a lot of ways your deck would benefit from them. So let's add these 3. All right, creature. I'm going to put in 1, and we'll write mana pool. Okay, I imagine they don't add that, so let's just say add. All right, better. So, not all of these, but things like Avacyn's Pilgrim. Which one do you have? You're playing Birds of Paradise as your single one. You could play Avacyn's Pilgrim, Boreal Druid. You could play Delighted Halfling would work here, but it's particularly expensive. Every single one that taps for green, Gilded Goose, where we are Land of War Elves. Noble Hierarch sticks out as a card that's also gone considerably down in price. Yeah. Even something like Ceruli Caretaker is particularly good here because you want to tap your creatures down. All of these, I think, are pretty much free for you to play. I would tell you straight away to play every single one that taps multiple or off white colors, and then off green colors, and then I would tell you to heavily consider every single one that also taps for green straight away, because this deck just benefits so highly for mana dorks. They're all creatures that represent getting Toskia out faster, getting Toskia back, because without Toskia on the battlefield, a lot of your deck kind of fizzles. So not only do you need to be able to keep her on the battlefield, you need to be able to cast her back onto the battlefield should something happen to her, right? And I think it is very notable as well that one of the main problems we have with mana dorks is they lose a lot of their use later in the game, right? Tapping for one additional color often isn't as strong as the other things you could do when you cast a card like this late game. But because, or if you've had one since the start of the game, but because we're now giving them an alternative ability, instead of tapping for mana, we tap for card advantage because your deck wants those cards in the graveyard. They become a lot stronger. So I think it's pretty easy. I'm just gonna straight up say for all of the cards that you might be not sure of or that I've suggested you take out, try Mana Dorks. I know it's maybe not the most exciting change to a deck like this because I don't know, it's not like another infinite combo or another immediate way to win the game, but it does represent powering up the deck in a really kind of banal way, maybe mundane is the better word, a very mundane way that really you might not feel it at first, but it's a substantial power up. I think people sometimes, as much as we've been taught for a really long time playing Commander, the importance of land ramp and mana fixing, I think sometimes people still tend to forget how much its power can, influence a deck. And when we look at a deck like this, like we're playing the Signets, which I really like. And we could, if you wanted, play the Talismans as well, because we have a 4 mana commander, and there are 3 colors, which are the 2 rules that make me immediately want to play Talismans or Signets. We are in green. We are in green, and so we have access to mana dorks. So we have to make a bit of a measured approach, right? We need to see which one would we rather? Do we want more artifacts at 2 mana, or do we want more 1 mana creatures? And generally, my rule is if you're using mana dorks, there has to be a reason for it. Either you want that burst in power that mana dorks provide because they come out earlier but are more vulnerable to hate, or with Toskia, we have a secondary reason to be using them because her ability makes them stronger. The other thing I'm going to suggest as a card is actually a win condition, and it will be the Jace that we're missing. Our, let's see, our very friendly Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries is notable because he has the text that if you would draw a card with your library has no cards in it, you will win the game instead, which is just another version of Thassa's Oracle or Laboratory Maniac, while being a little harder to kind of interact with in the sense that you cannot point, a lightning bolt or swords to plowshares at him. He does he can be attacked, so generally you want to keep him till the end of the game, get him back, and put him in play. One other thing that kind of comes to mind that you could play, and I'm pretty sure you aren't playing it. Yeah, I don't see it. Let's go sort by mana value. Is it Gaia's Blessing? No, it's not this one. So there is a card, and we're going to find out. I believe it's in blue-green, and it is a green card. Shuffle 3. Let's see if we can find it. None of these look correct. So let's try removing the 3. Let's see what we find. We're looking for a card that selectively shuffles cards from your graveyard back into your deck and has a flashback cost, if I remember correctly. Maybe that's how we should look. Let's add flashback. There we go. We're looking at Turn the Earth. Turn the Earth says choose up to 3 cards in graveyards. The owners of those cards shuffle them into their libraries. You gain 2 life. Flashback. I'm going to make sure you aren't playing that. You are not. Oh, wait, I'm looking in the wrong section. You are still not. Perfect. So Turn the Earth is particularly good because it represents a situation where you've milled out the majority of your deck or all of your deck, and some of the cards you want are in there and you're having a hard time getting them back. Turn the Earth will shuffle them back in and increase your chances of drawing them. If you completely milled yourself out, Turn the Earth will guarantee you draw one of the 3, but I believe it says up to 3, so you could just put 1 card there. However, something I think is considerably stronger than this is the fact that it is instant speed, which means if I play Bajuka Bog when you're almost completely milled out and Thassa's Oracle is in your graveyard, you can respond with this ability to shuffle Thassa's Oracle back into your deck. Once Bajuka Bog exiles your graveyard, yeah, you might not be in the best place you were before, but you're not out of the game. You have a chance to keep going. So I would highly recommend this card. One extra thing I'm going to recommend is this is not a deck building thing, but a lot of people don't know this. According to the rules of Magic, when you're playing in paper, you can divide your graveyard into as many piles as you want, as long as your opponent kind of understands what's going on. I'm fairly certain that's true. I think a judge has explained that to me once. But with that in mind, you have a lot of flashback or otherwise interactive cards from your graveyard. If you wanted, you could just pile those to the side. I think that works in Commander. Now that I'm thinking about it, there's legacy cards that care about the order of your graveyard. And since those are legal in Commander, maybe that's not legal in Commander, and I'm thinking of Modern. Someone will have to look that up for me. I'm not sure. Otherwise, I think one other thing I would think about is maybe something like phase out. For one blue, slip out the back. I'm not going to necessarily recommend slip out the back. I'm just going to point out slip out the back. Slip out the back, something like Tyvar's Stand as well. Both of these cards are protection spells for 1 mana. I think your commander is particularly susceptible to be removed several times in a row. And having a few kind of defensive cards, it can't hurt, is what I'll say. I think there's something to note of, when your opponents are putting a lot of pressure, that being able to counter even one of them might give you the time to win or at least build up your board even further. A nice thing about Toskia is she only cares about the summoning sickness of the creature that's doing the tapping, and herself does not matter if she's summoning sick or not. And then I just thought of this now, but I'll leave this to you. If you wanted to, it would be cute. You could play miracle cards. A deck like this is particularly good at putting certain cards on top of your deck and keeping them there. Something like Temporal Mastery or Entreat the. I've completely changed my mind while saying this. Never mind. Play Brainstorm instead. I think all of those are too cute. I mean, play the miracle cards. Play the miracle cards if you wish. I think it's a lot more important to just play Brainstorm. The reason Brainstorm is really good in a deck like this is that tradition, and I should even check if you're playing it, which you're not. Uh, Brainstorms, the way Brainstorm works is this. You benefit when you have a way to shuffle your deck, or otherwise get rid of the cards on top of your deck because you do not want them. The idea is that you draw 3 fresh cards and you get rid of the 2 worst cards in your deck to get rid of them permanently with a shuffle so that you can draw into other cards. In a deck like this, you do not have, well, you have some shuffle abilities, but not an infinite one, like an infinite amount of them, but it doesn't matter because Surveil does the same thing here. Oh, before I forget, last 2 things, I promise. There were 2 I put aside in my mind that I thought were easy inclusions. Deeproot Wayfinder can replace Tarmogoyf pretty well. This is a creature that surveils, and then you get to return when it hits a player. It surveils, and you can return a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Sorry. Traditionally, this is kind of tricky to use when you don't have a mean like if you don't have a ton of fetch lands, you got to get kind of lucky. But your deck has a lot of really reliable surveil, so that this is pretty good at guaranteeing a land to come out. And I think it's just nice. A 2 mana that every turn gets a land onto the battlefield as long as it can get its damage in is pretty nice. And then the other one is Thoughtbound Phantasm. What a weird card. It is a one. It's a 2/2 defender, and every time you surveil, it gets a +1/+1 counter. And once it has 3 or more +1/+1 counters, which makes it a 5/5 or larger, it can attack. Isn't that neat? Now, is this really a card or is it a meme? I don't I don't know for sure. I think it's a one mana creature, so you can definitely include it. I think it's much better than Tarmogoyf in your deck. I think the fact that you can just tap it to surveil once a turn when you have your commander out makes up for whatever else you could say about it. But I also think it is realistic for this guy to get really, really big, right? Like I'm not crazy there. I think this could get really, really big easily. And should the situation be that you can't really attack with it, which is hard to believe with how big it is and the fact that it still gets vigilance from your commander, you could just tap it to do the surveil instead. I think you should play this card. All right. I hope these suggestions were helpful. I went a bit longer than I expected. I think this deck is on its way to being a very strong deck. Um, I think I think certain things just need to be cleaned up first. And once the mana curve gets played around with, once we put some mana dorks into it, I'll be really interested in seeing the next draft of it because I think it'll do very, very well. And if you do make that next draft, I would be very, very happy to see it. And if you have any other decks you want me to look at, I'd also be happy to see them. You can use the form in the video description below to send me a deck to look at. And if you could do the YouTube thing, if you want to like, comment, subscribe, I would be so happy. The channel is still growing, and any support is always, always appreciated. All right, good luck.